What would you do if the man who trusted no one suddenly asked you for the most unthinkable thing, not your love, not your companionship, but your body, in exchange for money? Richard Hale was a billionaire CEO, a man who had built walls around his heart higher than any skyscraper in Denver. He didn't believe in marriage. He didn't believe in love. All he wanted was an heir, a child to carry his name when he was gone. And then there was Anna Whitmore, his secretary, a woman of quiet strength, scarred by a broken marriage yet still raising her daughter with grace and resilience. She never imagined the bond that would grow between her and her boss, until one evening. Richard shattered her world with a proposal that wasn't about love, but about legacy. Could a heart so guarded ever learn to love? Could Anna forgive a man who saw her as a transaction before he saw her as a woman? And what happens when fate decides to write a story neither of them expected? Stay with me, dear listener. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because this is not just a love story. It's a story about fear, redemption, and the power of choosing each other against all odds. The soft hum of evening conversations drifted across the dining room of the Summit Grill, one of Denver's most exclusive restaurants. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over polished mahogany tables. Silverware glistened. Glasses of red wine glowed like small lanterns under the glow. Laughter and clinking forks filled the air, sounds of companionship, of people gathered together, of couples and friends enjoying the comfort of being seen and known. But at a corner table near the tall windows, one man sat alone. Richard Hale, 45 years old, CEO of Hale Dynamics, had the air of someone born into command. His presence was striking sharp jawline, graying hair at the temples, broad shoulders that spoke of a disciplined routine. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his tie perfectly knotted, shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked like a man who had everything a career that shaped industries, a fortune large enough to buy anything money could reach. And yet, the empty seat across from him told another story. Richard scanned the menu without interest. He knew he would order the salmon, not because he wanted it, but because it was light and predictable. Food, like much of his life, had become about efficiency. It filled a need, but did not touch his heart. He raised a glass of sparkling water, watching bubbles climb to the surface, and wondered vaguely why people around him laughed so easily. For Richard, laughter had always been complicated. His childhood had left him with too many scars to enjoy the simple rhythm of joy. His mother had walked out when he was only 10, leaving behind the faint smell of her perfume and the echo of slammed doors. His father, a man broken by disappointment and whiskey, disappeared soon after, sometimes physically, always emotionally. Richard learned early that love was unreliable, promises were fragile, and the safest path was to rely on no one but himself. He built his empire from that conviction. Discipline, long hours, relentless ambition, those were his weapons, and they had rewarded him. From a cramped apartment with peeling paint, he had climbed into glass towers overlooking the Rockies. From silence and abandonment, he had earned respect, fear, admiration, but not love, never love. At 45, Richard had long abandoned the thought of marriage. He told himself he didn't need it. That intimacy was a luxury for men who could afford to be weak. What he wanted, what he had begun to consider with unsettling regularity, was an heir, a child who could inherit not just his wealth, but his name, his legacy. A child who would mean his life's work would outlast him. He had the resources. He had the determination. What he lacked was trust in another human being. The waiter approached with a polite nod. The usual, Mr. Hale. Richard closed the menu and nodded. Yes, the salmon. Of course, sir. When the waiter left, Richard leaned back, his eyes drifting across the room. A family at the next table leaned close, sharing bites from each other's plates. A couple clinked glasses in quiet celebration. He felt no envy, only a kind of distant curiosity. People needed each other, he supposed. They found warmth in another's presence. He had warmth enough in the glow of success, hadn't he? Or was it just the warmth of the whiskey he drank alone at night? He shifted in his chair, his gaze falling on the empty seat across from him again. Something tightened in his chest. Not loneliness, he told himself, just the weight of silence. Silence had always been his companion. Outside the tall windows, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky. Denver's skyline stood proud, mountains rising like silent sentinels in the distance. It was beautiful, yes, but it also reminded him of something he couldn't name, a beauty that felt just out of reach. When his plate arrived, the salmon was arranged with precision pink flesh seared perfectly. Asparagus spears laid neatly beside, a drizzle of lemon butter glistening under the light. Richard picked up his fork, cut a piece, and tasted it. The flavors were clean, balanced. He chewed thoughtfully. It was good. Of course, it was good. This restaurant prided itself on perfection, and yet, something was missing. He lowered the fork, set it beside his plate, and exhaled slowly. Food, even when perfect, was only food. Without someone to share it with, it remained a transaction, a meal completed, not a memory made. Richard's mind, uninvited, drifted toward thoughts he had tried to suppress. The idea of a child, a future. Not a wife, not a partner. He didn't believe in such fragile things, but a child who bore his blood. A child who would never leave. A child who would remain, even when the laughter and clinking glasses of the world moved on without him. His jaw tightened. He told himself it was a practical thought, nothing sentimental. Legacy was what mattered, continuity. He wasn't looking for affection. He was looking for permanence. Still, as he glanced around at the other tables, the couples, the families, the small gestures of intimacy, he couldn't help but feel something shift deep inside. Not envy, not longing exactly, but something he couldn't name, something unsettling. He reached for his glass, took a slow sip of water, and forced his expression back into the mask of composure that had carried him this far. The salmon cooled on his plate. The laughter around him rose and fell like waves. And Richard Hale sat alone at his corner table, pretending he didn't care. But somewhere, buried under years of discipline and armor, a question began to stir. What if success wasn't enough? The office tower of Hale Dynamics gleamed against the Denver night sky. Most of its windows were dark, the building slowly falling into silence after a long day of corporate grind. But on the 28th floor, a pool of light still glowed from Richard Hale's corner office. Papers were scattered across his desk, and the faint hum of the city below drifted through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Richard checked the time, nearly 8 p.m. Most of his executives had long gone home, retreating to their families or their late-night comforts. Yet he was still here, restless, unwilling to face the solitude of his penthouse. Work had always been his armor, and tonight, he needed its shelter. He pressed the intercom. "Anna, are you still here?" A calm voice replied, "Yes." "Mr. Hale?" Richard almost smiled. Of course she was. Anna Whitmore rarely left before he did. Moments later, a soft knock preceded her entrance. Anna carried a leather-bound planner in one hand, a laptop balanced in the other. At 36, she had a presence that was not easily overlooked, poised, composed, with a quiet confidence that made her seem older than her years. Her blonde hair was swept back neatly, a few loose strands framing her face, her eyes clear. Steady blue seemed to observe more than they revealed. Richard studied her briefly. He had worked with Anna for over 3 years. She had been recommended by a friend when his former secretary abruptly resigned. At first, she had seemed almost too calm, too steady. But over time, Richard realized that her calmness was not passivity. It was strength. "Sit," he said simply, gesturing to the chair across from him. Anna set down her planner, adjusted her glasses, and waited. "There's a problem in the Denver branch," Richard said. "The project rollout has stalled. The department head claims half his team is threatening to walk." Something about long hours and lack of recognition. Anna listened, fingers resting lightly on her notebook. She didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words. Richard appreciated that. "What do you suggest?" he asked. She considered for a moment, then spoke with measured clarity. "People don't leave companies, they leave leaders. If the department head has lost their trust, no incentive package will fix it. But if we send someone down there tomorrow, someone neutral, who can listen without judgment, it might calm the waters long enough for solutions." Richard tilted his head. "Neutral? You mean you?" Anna met his gaze evenly. "Yes. I know their grievances. They've spoken to me before. They won't open up to you directly. You intimidate them. But they will talk to me." He leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow raised. Few people in his company dared to speak so plainly to him. Fewer still made sense when they did. "And you believe you can resolve this?" "I believe I can start a conversation," Anna replied. "And sometimes that's all people need to be heard." Richard's eyes lingered on her. Her tone wasn't boastful, nor was it timid. It carried a steadiness that disarmed him. In the high-stakes world he lived in, people often performed, postured, or pleaded. Anna simply spoke the truth as she saw it. "Fine," he said at last. "Go tomorrow morning. Take whatever authority you need. Report back to me by evening." "Understood," she said with a small nod, gathering her notes. As she prepared to leave, Richard surprised himself by asking, "Do you ever get tired of all this?" Anna paused at the door, her hand resting on the frame. "What do you mean, the late nights? The constant pressure?" "Me?" His voice carried no jest. She turned, and for a moment, something softened in her eyes. "Everyone has their burdens, Mr. Hale. Yours are heavy, but they're not impossible." And as for the late nights, she allowed herself a faint smile. "I've known harder nights." He watched her disappear down the hall, her footsteps fading into the quiet. Later, when Richard finally returned home, he couldn't shake the image of Anna's calm gaze. He tried to dismiss it after all. She was his secretary, nothing more. But her words lingered. "I've known harder nights." What had she meant? He realized, with some discomfort, that though Anna had worked at his side for years, he knew very little about her life beyond the office. She kept her private world carefully folded away, like a letter never opened, and yet, in that folded world, Richard sensed a kind of peace, a resilience he found both unfamiliar and strangely magnetic. For the first time in a long while, he felt curiosity not about a deal, or a merger, or a competitor, but about a person, about Anna. The office after dark had a different rhythm. The constant ring of phones, the shuffle of feet in the hallways, the echo of fast-talking executives, it all fell away once the sun dipped behind the mountains. What remained was the low hum of the air conditioning, the faint buzz of city lights through the glass, and the occasional sigh of an elevator making its lonely climb. Richard Hale stayed late most evenings, his desk lamp casting a solitary glow across contracts and spreadsheets. He liked the silence. Or, at least, that was what he told himself. Silence had no expectations, no betrayals. But lately, he was not always alone. Anna Whitmore often lingered, working quietly at the small desk outside his office. At first, Richard assumed it was duty, her way of keeping up with his demanding schedule. But he began to notice something else. Even after her tasks were complete, she would sometimes remain answering a few stray emails or reorganizing files that hardly needed attention, almost as if she sensed he didn't want the building to be entirely empty. One night, close to 9, Richard stepped out of his office and found Anna still at her desk. She was reviewing a stack of reports, her hair slightly loosened from a long day, her glasses sliding down the bridge of her nose. "You should go home," he said. She looked up, calm as ever. "And you?" "I live here," he replied dryly. A small smile touched her lips. "That explains a lot." Richard leaned against the doorframe, uncharacteristically uncertain. He wasn't a man who lingered in conversation. Meetings were efficient, transactional, but with Anna, Silence didn't feel like an inconvenience. It felt like an invitation. "Come inside," he said finally. She followed him into his office, setting her papers aside. The two of them sat opposite each other, the glow of the desk lamp between them. For a while, they spoke of practical things, deadlines, travel arrangements, strategies for the Denver branch. But the conversation drifted, almost against Richard's will, into less guarded waters. "Why do you stay so late?" he asked. Anna shrugged gently. "Some nights, home is quiet. My daughter is with her father on certain evenings. The silence there feels heavier than the silence here." Richard tilted his head. "You have a daughter?" "Yes." "Emily. She's 10. Her voice softened as she spoke the name, though her expression remained steady. "She's bright. Loves books more than toys. Sometimes I think she's already older than me." Richard found himself leaning forward slightly. He had known Anna for years, and yet he realized with a jolt he had never asked her about her life beyond the office. "You're divorced?" he asked carefully. She nodded. 5 years now. It wasn't violent or scandalous, just a slow unraveling. "We married young. He wanted freedom, and I wanted stability. In the end, we gave each other neither." Her words carried no bitterness, only the matter-of-fact weight of someone who had walked through fire and learned not to flinch. And Emily Richard pressed. "She stayed with me," Anna said. "Her father visits, but I'm the one who makes lunches, checks homework, pays bills." She allowed a quiet laugh, a sound both light and tired. "Sometimes I think single mothers are less parents and more magicians stretching hours, stretching paychecks, stretching themselves." Richard didn't laugh. He didn't smile. Instead, he did something far rarer. He listened, really listened. Her words stirred something uncomfortably human in him. He knew nothing of parenthood, nothing of nurturing. His own childhood had been a lesson in absence, not presence. And yet, hearing Anna describe her daughter, her struggles, her resilience, he felt a thread of connection he could not explain. "Why stay here?" Then he asked. "You could take another position, something with fewer hours, more balance." Anna met his gaze evenly. "Because this job gives Emily what I can't, stability, security, and because—" She hesitated, then spoke with quiet conviction. "Because I like building order out of chaos. You create storms, Mr. Hale. I steady them. It's a strange balance, but it works." Richard sat back, unsettled by her honesty. People rarely spoke to him this way. They tried to impress him, flatter him, outmaneuver him. Anna did none of that. She simply placed the truth on the table and left it there, unadorned. For a moment, neither spoke. The city lights blinked in the distance, a steady rhythm against the silence. Finally, Richard asked, almost against his will, "Do you ever regret it? Choosing stability over something else?" Anna's eyes softened. "I regret things sometimes, but not Emily, never her. She's the reason I keep going." Richard felt a flicker of something strange in his chest, not envy, not quite longing, but the awareness of a world he had always closed off to himself, a world where love wasn't weakness, but fuel. The clock struck 9:30. Anna gathered her planner, rising from the chair. "You should go home, too," she said gently. Richard only nodded. He watched her leave, her calm footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. When the door closed, his office felt colder, the silence heavier. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the untouched papers on his desk. For years, he had thought of himself as a man complete on his own. Tonight, he wondered just for a moment if completeness required more than discipline and success, and if it might be found in the quiet presence of someone like Anna Whitmore. The days that followed took on a rhythm Richard Hale had never expected. Where once he lived in rigid schedules, meetings at 9, calls at noon, dinners with investors at 7, now his calendar seemed to bend in small, almost imperceptible ways, and every adjustment had one common denominator: Anna Whitmore. It began innocently enough. "Would you like to join me for lunch, Mr. "Hail," she had asked one afternoon, her tone casual, professional. Richard almost declined. His habit was to eat alone, working through emails while chewing mechanically on a salad. But something in her calm gaze made him pause. "Fine," he said, "half an hour." They ended up staying for nearly 2. The cafe was modest, tucked on a quiet Denver street, the kind of place Richard would never have entered on his own. Yet the food surprised him: simple sandwiches, soup warm with herbs, bread baked fresh that morning. Anna talked about Emily, about the books her daughter devoured, about the science fair project that had overtaken their kitchen table. Richard listened, sipping his black coffee, and found himself strangely at ease. It wasn't business. It wasn't strategy. It was life, messy, ordinary, unpolished. And he realized, with quiet astonishment, that he didn't want it to end. From then on, lunches together became more frequent, sometimes in that same cafe, sometimes in the company cafeteria, where Anna insisted the chili was underrated. Richard still kept his controlled posture, still chose his words carefully, but beneath it all, he was curious. And then came the business trip. A conference in Seattle required his presence, and Anna, as always, handled the logistics. When their flight was delayed, they found themselves side by side in the lounge, surrounded by restless travelers. Anna pulled a paperback novel from her bag, and Richard watched as she disappeared into its pages, her brow furrowed, lips curving faintly at some private amusement. "What is it?" he asked finally. She looked up, surprised. "A mystery novel?" "Not your kind of thing. Try me." So, she told him the plot, laughing lightly at the improbable twists, and he found himself leaning in, drawn not to the story itself, but to the way she told it, with animation, with warmth, with the rare gift of making the ordinary feel alive. By the time the flight boarded, Richard realized something unsettling he had actually enjoyed waiting. Seattle passed in a blur of presentations and negotiations, but the memory he carried home was not the deal closed. It was Anna at the hotel piano in the lobby, one late evening. She had been waiting for him after a dinner with partners, her coat draped over her arm. Out of quiet curiosity, she pressed a key, then another, her fingers sketching out a hesitant melody. "You play?" Richard asked, surprising himself with the softness in his voice. She smiled faintly. "Not well. Just enough to remember what it feels like." And then, without warning, he sat beside her. His large hands, more accustomed to contracts and keyboards, touched the ivory with practiced precision. A slow, measured peace filled the air. Something classical, tender, restrained. Anna turned to him in astonishment. "I didn't know you could play." "I don't," he said simply, though his fingers betrayed him, moving with memory. Not anymore. The truth was, Richard had not played piano in over 20 years. Music belonged to a different life, a life he had buried under ambition. But sitting there beside Anna, the notes returned as if they had been waiting. When he finished, silence lingered between them, soft, fragile. "Why did you stop?" she asked gently. He looked at the keys, not at her. "Because it reminded me of things I'd rather forget." Anna didn't press. She simply nodded, her eyes carrying an understanding that unsettled him more than any confrontation could. Back in Denver, their closeness continued in small, almost imperceptible steps. Richard discovered that Anna kept a bonsai plant on her desk, something he had overlooked until one evening when she stayed late, carefully trimming its branches with patient hands. "It's a living sculpture," she explained when he asked. "It takes years to shape. You can't rush it, and you can't control it completely. You just guide it." Richard found himself staring at the tiny tree, its delicate form shaped by both discipline and surrender. Something about it mirrored Anna herself. Days later, she discovered his secret. At his penthouse, during a late evening of reviewing documents, Anna had stepped away to take a call. When she returned, faint notes drifted through the hall, the soft strains of piano from a hidden room. She followed the sound, and there he was, seated at a grand piano, eyes closed, his expression stripped of its usual control. She didn't interrupt, only watched until he noticed her. "I thought you said you don't play anymore," she teased softly. Richard's face tightened, but there was no anger, only a vulnerability he rarely allowed. "Old habits," he muttered. Anna smiled gently. "Some habits are worth keeping." That night, after she left, Richard stood by the piano for a long time, staring at the keys. He had guarded himself for decades, building walls of stone around his heart. Yet, somehow, without force, without demand, Anna was finding the cracks. He lay awake later, staring at the ceiling of his silent penthouse, and admitted a truth he would never have spoken aloud. He looked forward to the next lunch, the next trip, the next small conversation. He looked forward to Anna, and for a man who had convinced himself he needed no one, that realization was both terrifying and undeniable. Richard Hale did not often invite people into his home. His penthouse in downtown Denver was a place of retreat, not hospitality. Walls of glass framed the mountains to the west and the sprawl of city lights below, but the rooms themselves were spare, curated, almost too perfect art chosen by designers, furniture in clean lines, not a trace of clutter. It was a fortress built against the chaos of the world. Yet tonight, the fortress had opened its doors. Anna Whitmore stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood. She carried no pretense, only her usual poise. Still, she could not help but glance around, taking in the vast windows, the quiet elegance, the absence of anything personal. "Beautiful view," she said gently. Richard nodded, taking her coat. "Yes, but I rarely notice it." They dined at a small table near the glass, candles flickering against the night. The meal had been prepared by a private chef, but Richard had chosen the menu himself. Roasted chicken with herbs, fresh vegetables, a simple fruit tart for dessert. To Anna, it was a surprise. For all his wealth, he had not chosen extravagance. Chicken, she teased softly, not caviar or lobster. "I don't like pretense," he replied. "Food should be honest." There was something about the way he said it direct, almost vulnerable, that made her chest tighten. The evening unfolded with unexpected ease. They spoke of books, of music, of the strange quiet of airports. Richard even told her about his bonsai tree, something she had never thought he would admit to. For a while, it felt almost normal. Not CEO and secretary, not fortress and intruder. Just two people sharing a meal. When dessert was finished, Richard poured them both coffee. He set his cup down, fingers tapping once against the porcelain, a rare sign of hesitation. "Anna," he began, his voice lower than usual, more deliberate. She looked up, waiting. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I need to ask." Her pulse quickened. His gaze held hers, steady, unreadable. "I've spent my life avoiding marriage, avoiding the illusions people call love. I don't believe in them. They end, they betray, but—" He paused, searching for words. "I want a child." Anna blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "A child? Yes." He leaned forward, his tone controlled but intent. "An heir, someone to carry my name, my work, my legacy, blood of my blood. That is the only permanence I can believe in." She felt the warmth drain from her face. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because," Richard said, and now his voice sharpened with decision, "I want you to carry that child." For a moment, the world tilted. The city lights outside seemed to blur, the sound of her heartbeat rising in her ears. "You," what she whispered, "I want you to be the mother." "Not in the traditional sense," he clarified quickly, as if to soften the blow. "I don't want marriage. I don't want the illusions that come with it. I want an arrangement. You will carry my child, and in return, I will give you $1 million, enough to give Emily every security, every opportunity. Afterward, you will be free, no obligations, no entanglements." His words landed like stones, one after another, heavy and cold. Anna stared at him, her breath caught. At first, she thought it was some cruel test, some joke delivered in his usual stoic manner. But there was no jest in his gray eyes, only calculation, only certainty. "You want me to be your surrogate?" she said slowly, the word trembling in her mouth. "Yes," he said firmly. "Because I trust you. I trust your strength, your integrity. I would not entrust this to anyone else." Anna's chest constricted. Trust. He spoke of trust as though it were a transaction, as though it could replace love, intimacy, the very essence of what bound two people together. Her chair scraped against the floor as she rose, trembling. "Is that what you think of me, that I can be bought, that my body, my life, my heart are just a contract to you?" Richard stood as well, his expression unreadable. "I'm not asking for love. Anna, I'm asking for reason. You and I, we are not children. We know what life is. This would give you security. It would give me continuity. It is practical. Practical." Her voice cracked. "You've spent months pulling me into your world, lunches and staus, conversations, glimpses of who you really are. And I believed you trusted me as a person, not as a vessel." His eyes flickered, but his voice remained calm. "I do care for you, in my way. But love is an illusion." This he gestured between them, cold and precise. "This is real." Tears stung her eyes. She shook her head, backing away as if from a wound too deep to bear. "You don't care. You've never cared. You just saw me as convenient, replaceable." "Not replaceable," he said sharply. "Essential." But the word only deepened the cut. Anna grabbed her coat, her hands trembling. "I can't do this. Richard, I can't be your transaction." He reached out, not touching, but his hand lingered in the air between them. "Anna, listen." "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You listen. I thought there was something here. I thought, for once in my life, I could trust someone. But you've proven you're no different from the world I escaped. Cold, calculated, empty." Her tears blurred the city lights as she turned and walked toward the door. The elevator closed behind her with a soft chime, leaving Richard alone in his immaculate penthouse, his proposal echoing in the silence like a verdict. For years, he had convinced himself he did not need love. That night, he proved it. And yet, as the door shut on Anna Whitmore, something inside him cracked in a way he could not control. Anna Whitmore had never felt so small, so diminished. The elevator ride down from Richard Hale's penthouse seemed endless, the floor numbers blinking one by one as if mocking her. By the time she reached the lobby, her vision blurred with tears. She clutched her coat to her chest as if it were armor. Outside, Denver's night air bit at her cheeks. She walked quickly, almost running, though she didn't know where to go. Home, perhaps. Anywhere but here. Anywhere away from the man who had, moments ago, turned her heart into a bargaining chip. She had truly believed that the quiet meals, the late conversations, the softened glimpses of his world were signs of something deeper. She had felt warmth where he had once been cold, a spark where he had long been stone, and she had dared to hope, for the first time in years, that love could bloom again. And then, with one sentence, he had shattered it. $1 million to carry my child. The words echoed in her head, heavy and metallic. She had thought she was more than his secretary, more than his employee. She had thought she mattered. Instead, he had reduced her to biology, to womb and contract, a surrogate, a tool. By the time she reached her apartment, Anna's hands were shaking so badly she struggled to unlock the door. Emily was asleep, thank God, and the apartment was still, save for the faint hum of the heater. Anna dropped her coat onto the couch, pressed her palms against the counter, and tried to steady her breath. The tears came in waves, hot and relentless. She pressed a hand to her mouth to muffle the sound. She could not wake Emily. She could not let her daughter see her like this, broken, humiliated, betrayed. Hours passed, but sleep never came. Every time Anna closed her eyes, she saw Richard's face calm, composed, speaking of trust as if it were a currency, speaking of her as if she were both essential and disposable. Her heart ached with fury, but beneath it, like a stubborn ember, was something even more painful love. She hated herself for it. She hated that after everything he had said, she still longed for the man who had listened to her stories, who had played piano in the quiet of a hotel lobby, who had looked at her with a softness she had believed was real. Fool, she whispered into the darkness. You're a fool. Anna? The next day, she did what she had always done when life collapsed. She built walls. At work, she kept her head down, answering emails, organizing schedules, keeping her distance. When Richard called her office, she let it ring. When he sent messages, she deleted them without reading. She avoided him with a precision born of survival. Richard tried. He came to her desk, his expression unreadable, asking for a moment of her time. She excused herself. He cornered her after a meeting, his voice low, almost pleading. She walked past him as though he were invisible. At night, however, invisibility was impossible. In her quiet apartment, after Emily had gone to bed, Anna's defenses crumbled. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold, replaying every word of that night. I trust you. You are the only one I would ask. Trust. He had cloaked his selfishness in that word, as if it were a gift. But what he offered was not trust. It was control. It was ownership disguised as choice. And yet, she could not banish the memory of how his eyes had softened when she spoke of Emily, how his hands had lingered on the piano keys with unspoken sorrow, how he had seemed for brief, fragile moments like a man reaching for something beyond himself. It was that contradiction that tore her apart. The man she thought she knew and the man who had made that cruel proposal, they were the same. Which one was real? Mom? The small voice startled her. She looked up to see Emily, standing in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Why are you still awake? Anna asked, forcing her voice steady. Emily patted over, climbing into her lap. I heard you. You sounded sad. Anna swallowed hard, pressing her lips to her daughter's hair. I'm okay, sweetheart, just thinking too much. Emily looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. You don't have to think alone. You have me. Anna's throat tightened. Out of the mouths of children, truth often came sharper than any blade. She hugged Emily close, tears burning again. Her daughter's love was pure, unconditional, and perhaps that was why Richard's betrayal hurt so deeply. Anna had let herself imagine just for a moment that he could offer something similar, but she knew now. She could not let him near her heart again. She could not forgive being reduced to a contract. The following week, she avoided every attempt he made to reach her. His calls went unanswered. His presence outside her office door was met with silence. She even rearranged her schedule, leaving the building before he did, taking side exits to avoid confrontation. Each avoidance was a small act of survival, but also a fresh wound, because every time she turned away, every time she erased his name from her phone, she felt the sting of loss, not of money, not of opportunity, but of the fragile, impossible hope she had allowed herself to feel. She loved him. She hated that she loved him. And she knew, with aching certainty, that was exactly why she had to stay away. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Richard Hale was no stranger to isolation. He had lived most of his life inside it. But this silence felt different. It was not chosen. It was not protective. It was absence. And it followed him like a shadow. At Hale Dynamics, the office buzzed as always, meetings, presentations, the hum of ambition. Yet Richard noticed what others did not, the empty chair outside his office when Anna left early, the lack of her steady presence in late-night hours, the silence where her voice had once filled the room with calm assurance. He tried to bury himself in work. He reviewed contracts, negotiated deals, signed off on projects, but the papers blurred. The numbers failed to hold his focus. Every time he glanced up, expecting to see her at her desk, he was met with emptiness. He had underestimated her absence. Richard had thought she would consider his offer, perhaps even understand it. But Anna was not like others. She had walked away, and with her went the fragile warmth that had begun to take root in his carefully controlled life. At night, his penthouse echoed with loneliness. He would sit at the piano, hands poised over the keys, but no music came. He would stare out at the city lights, but their brilliance felt hollow. He had lived alone for years, and yet now solitude seemed unbearable. Across town, Anna was fighting her own battle. She devoted herself to Emily. They cooked together pancakes on Sunday mornings, pasta tossed with herbs on weeknights. They watched movies curled up on the couch, Emily giggling while Anna forced smiles. She helped with homework, attended school meetings, and kept their apartment filled with the ordinary rhythm of life. But when Emily was asleep, the ache returned. Anna would sit at the kitchen table, tea cooling in her hands, replaying Richard's words in her mind. The proposal had cut deep, not only because of its coldness, but because of how much she had wanted something else from him. She had let herself believe he could care, that he could change, and perhaps, in some small way, he had. She remembered his music, his quiet moments of vulnerability. Those were not illusions. They were real, which made the betrayal sharper. One evening, her friend Claire stopped by. Claire had been Anna's confidant since college practical, outspoken, with a knack for reading people. She set a bottle of wine on the counter and raised an eyebrow at Anna's weary expression. "You've been hiding," Claire said, pouring 2 glasses, and I know why. Anna sighed. I know you've been seeing him. The mysterious boss. The one you swore was impossible." Claire leaned closer. "And judging by your face, he did something spectacularly stupid." Anna gave a bitter laugh. "Stupid doesn't begin to cover it. Tell me." So she did. She told Claire about the dinners, the quiet conversations, the glimpses of a man who seemed more than his reputation. And then she told her about the proposal, the $1 million, the surrogate, the cold calculation. Claire listened without interruption, her brows furrowing deeper with every word. When Anna finished, silence hung between them. Finally, Claire said, "Well, that's about as romantic as a bank loan." Anna let out a shaky laugh, tears pricking her eyes. "I thought it was love, Claire, or the start of it, and then he reduced me to a body, a transaction." Claire reached across the table, taking her hand. "That's because, for him, love is foreign. It doesn't mean he didn't feel something. It means he didn't know how to honor it." Anna shook her head. "That doesn't excuse it. I can't raise Emily with a man who thinks affection is negotiable." "No," Claire agreed softly, "but don't confuse his failure with your worth. You are not what he asked of you. You are more." The words sank deep, steadying her. Still, Anna's heart ached, because beneath the anger, beneath the pride, she could not deny what she felt. She loved him. She loved the man who listened when no one else did, who played piano with sorrow etched into his face, who showed her glimpses of a tenderness he refused to name. That love did not vanish with betrayal. It lingered, stubborn, painful. Richard, meanwhile, sat alone in his office late one evening, staring at the bonsai Anna had once trimmed with patient hands. He reached out, touching one fragile leaf, and whispered into the silence, "Why can't I let you go?" Neither of them had answers, only silence. Richard Hale had always believed his strength lay in control of his company, control of his time, control of his emotions. He had built his empire on that foundation, never allowing sentiment to sway him, never letting desire override reason. For years, it had worked. He had risen above failure, outpaced rivals, and shaped industries to his will. But now, control felt like a cage. It was 2 weeks since Anna Whitmore had walked out of his penthouse, her eyes wet with betrayal, her voice trembling with anger. 2 weeks of silence. 2 weeks without her calm presence in the office, her quiet efficiency smoothing the edges of his day. He had not realized how much space she occupied in his life until it was empty. At first, he told himself it was frustration. He had made her a rational offer practical, mutually beneficial. She should have seen it that way. But late at night, sitting in his immaculate penthouse with a glass of untouched scotch, he felt the lie unravel. It wasn't about the offer. It was about her. He saw it now. With a clarity that terrified him, his proposal had been a shield, a way to disguise his fear, to package his need for her into something safe, something contractual, so he would not have to admit what truly burned inside him. He didn't just want a child. He wanted Anna. The realization landed with the weight of stone. It explained the restless nights, the hollowness of her absence, the way he caught himself reaching for his phone to call her only to stop, his pride freezing his hand. He had not been seeking legacy alone. He had been seeking connection, and he had nearly destroyed it. One evening, unable to bear the silence, Richard sat at his piano. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Music had always been his most dangerous weakness. It brought back memories of vulnerability, of a childhood when he still believed his mother might return, when he still thought love could heal. He had silenced that part of himself for decades. But tonight, the music came unbidden. A slow, aching melody filled the room, notes rising and falling like confessions too raw for words. For the first time, he allowed himself to play, not for discipline, not for memory, but for longing, and every note whispered her name. Anna. The next morning, he resolved to act. He sent flowers to her office, white lilies, simple, elegant. They came back untouched, returned to his desk with a polite note from the receptionist. Ms. Whitmore declined delivery. He wrote her an email, carefully composed, each word chosen to balance apology and restraint. He stared at the blinking cursor before hitting send. Hours later, the only reply was silence. He tried calling her personal line. Straight to voicemail. His messages apologize, request to meet, even a blunt, please. Anna were left unanswered. At the office, he found himself watching for her. She arrived early, left quickly, avoided his gaze in hallways, in meetings. She spoke only when necessary, her tone professional, distant. It was as if she had built an invisible wall, and no matter how he tried, he could not break through. The rejection stung more than he had expected. Richard had faced ruthless competitors, hostile boards, hostile takeovers. He had stared down men who wanted his downfall and never flinched. But Anna's silence cut deeper than any rival's attack, because this was not about business. It was about the one thing he had never learned to master: love. That night, Richard sat alone in his penthouse once more. The city lights stretched before him, brilliant and cold. He poured himself a drink, then set it down untouched. He thought of Anna's words. I thought there was something here. I thought I could trust you. He had broken that trust. Out of fear, out of arrogance, out of a lifetime spent convincing himself that love was weakness. And now, he faced the truth he could no longer deny: love was not weakness. It was everything. He leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the weight of the admission settle over him. For the first time, Richard Hale felt powerless, and he knew that unless he found the courage to change, he would lose the only woman who had ever made him want to be more than a fortress of control. He did not know how to win her back. He only knew he had to try. The rain had been falling for hours, drenching Denver in silver sheets that blurred headlights and turned sidewalks into rivers. The city, usually vibrant with late-night chatter, felt subdued, hushed beneath the steady downpour. Anna Whitmore left the Hale Dynamics building with her umbrella tilted low, her heels clicking quickly against the wet pavement. It had been another long day, her body tired, her heart heavier still. She had seen Richard in the hallway earlier, his eyes lingering on her, but she had walked past without a word. It was easier this way. Distance, silence, self-preservation. She told herself she was done. She told herself she was free. But as she turned the corner toward the parking lot, a tall figure stepped into her path. Richard Hale stood there, rain soaking his suit, hair plastered to his forehead, gray eyes unwavering even as water streamed down his face. He carried no umbrella, no shield, only raw determination. "Anna," he said, his voice low but clear against the storm. Her breath caught. "You shouldn't be here. I don't care," he answered, stepping closer. Rain dripped from his coat, pooling at his shoes. "I needed to see you." She gripped her umbrella tighter, her chest tightening. "Richard, this is inappropriate. Whatever you're trying to say, it doesn't matter anymore." "Yes, it does." His tone broke, not with authority, but with urgency. "It matters more than anything." Anna shook her head, trying to push past him, but his words stopped her cold. "I was wrong." She froze, her heart pounding. "I was wrong," Richard repeated, his voice rough, as if dragged from the depths of a man unaccustomed to apology. "I thought I could control everything: business, emotions, even love. I told myself I only wanted a child because it was safer than admitting the truth." Her eyes flicked up to his, rain streaking down her cheeks like tears she refused to shed. "The truth," she whispered, his voice broke, "that it isn't a child I want. It's you." The storm raged around them, thunder rolling in the distance. But for Anna, time seemed to stop. "You can't mean that," she said, though her voice trembled. "I do," he insisted. "I want you not as an arrangement, not as a surrogate, not as some practical plan. I want you in my life. I want your laughter, your strength, your presence. I can't stand the silence without you." Her grip on the umbrella faltered, her hand shaking. The words were everything she had longed to hear, yet everything she feared to believe. "You don't understand what you did to me," she said, her voice breaking. "You made me feel like I was nothing more than a body to be bought. You took the fragile trust I gave you and shattered it." Richard stepped closer, rain cascading off his shoulders. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I was afraid. Anna, afraid of needing someone, afraid of loving someone. I thought if I reduced it to a contract, it would protect me, but it destroyed the one thing I needed most. You." Her heart twisted. She saw the truth in his eyes, raw, unguarded, desperate. This was not the CEO who commanded boardrooms with icy precision. This was a man stripped bare by his own mistakes. "I can't just forget what you said," she whispered. "I'm not asking you to forget," he said quickly. "I'm asking you to see me now. See that I'm trying. See that for the first time in my life. I'm willing to risk everything for someone. For you." The rain hammered against the pavement, pooling around their feet. Anna's chest rose and fell, torn between anger and longing. Part of her wanted to turn away, to protect herself from further pain. But another part, the part that had laughed with him over coffee, that had listened to his music, that had glimpsed his hidden tenderness, ached to believe. "Richard," she said, her voice barely audible, "I don't know if I can trust you." "Then let me prove it," he urged, his voice fierce, almost breaking. "Let me earn back what I destroyed. I don't care how long it takes, how many times you push me away. I'll keep coming back until you know I mean it. Because I do. I love you. Anna, God help me. I love you." The words landed like thunder in her heart. For so long she had waited, silently longing for him to say them, and now, under the relentless storm, he had. Tears mingled with rain on her cheeks. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself, to silence the chaos inside her. "Finally," she whispered, "I want to believe you." His hand reached for hers, hesitant, trembling, as if afraid she might vanish. She let him touch her fingers, just for a moment. "Then believe me," he said, his voice raw. "Believe that I was a fool, and that I would rather drown in this rain than live another night without you." The storm swallowed the city, but in that corner of the world, only two figures mattered, standing together in the downpour, bound not by contracts or control, but by a fragile, desperate hope that love might still be possible. Forgiveness was never a single moment. It was not a door swinging open all at once. It was a slow, hesitant process, like a wound knitting together, tender and uncertain, vulnerable to the slightest touch. For Anna Whitmore. Richard's confession in the rain lingered like an echo she couldn't quiet. She had seen sincerity in his eyes, had heard the cracks in his voice that no calculation could fake. And yet, memory was stubborn. His offer, the cold words that reduced her to a contract, still burned like a brand. So she kept her distance. Even as he drew closer, Richard, for his part, did not retreat. Where once he would have buried himself in work, letting pride cover mistakes, now he showed up in small, quiet ways. The first morning after their confrontation, Anna found a thermos of coffee on her desk. Not the bitter office brew, but the dark roast she favored from the corner cafe. No note, no grand gesture, just the coffee, warm and waiting. At lunch, instead of commanding her schedule, Richard asked, "Would you like to eat together?" The question was simple, but the difference was unmistakable. He was asking, not ordering. Anna hesitated before agreeing. They sat in the company cafeteria, surrounded by chatter and clatter. Richard didn't dominate the conversation with business. Instead, he asked about Emily. "She wants to join the debate club," Anna said, her voice soft with both pride and worry. "But she's nervous. She thinks her voice isn't strong enough." Richard listened, really listened, and then said, "Strength isn't volume, it's conviction. If she believes what she says, people will hear her." Anna blinked, surprised by the insight. "You sound like you've done this before." His lips curved faintly. "Boardrooms aren't so different from classrooms." The answer made her laugh, a quiet, reluctant laugh, but it was real. Over the next weeks, Richard's persistence became steady, but not suffocating. He didn't press for declarations or demand forgiveness. Instead, he wove himself into ordinary moments. When Anna stayed late to finish a report, he appeared at her desk with takeout boxes. "You forget to eat," he said simply, setting one in front of her. When her car broke down in the parking garage, he was the one who drove her home, not with grand speeches, but with quiet conversation about traffic and weather, as though they were simply two neighbors passing time. When Emily had a school recital, Anna was startled to find Richard in the audience, seated discreetly in the back row. He didn't intrude, didn't draw attention. But afterward, when Emily bounded off stage, cheeks flushed with pride, Richard leaned down and told her, "You were remarkable." Anna's heart clenched at the look on Emily's face, the glow of being seen, of being recognized by someone she respected without even knowing why. And yet, for all his efforts, Anna remained cautious. Her walls were not easily lowered. She responded politely, sometimes warmly, but always with a reserve he could not miss. One evening, as they walked out of the office together, Richard said quietly, "I know I can't erase what I said. I can only prove I'm more than that." Anna glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Words are easy. Richard, it's time that shows the truth." He nodded. "Then I'll give you time. As much as you need." That patience was, perhaps, the greatest change of all. Richard Hale, the man who had built empires on speed and precision, was now learning to wait. For Anna, the waiting tested her in equal measure. Alone at night, she found herself replaying their new moments, his laughter at Emily's jokes, the way he carried groceries without being asked, the rare softness in his eyes when he looked at her. She wanted to believe it was real. She wanted to believe that, beneath the armor, he had finally chosen honesty. But her heart still remembered the sting of betrayal. So, she held back, walking the fragile line between hope and fear. One Saturday morning, Richard surprised her with something unexpected. He appeared at her apartment door, not in a suit but in jeans and a simple sweater, holding a small bonsai tree in a clay pot. "What's this?" she asked, startled. "A replacement," he said quietly. "For the one in your office? I thought you might like another at home." She looked at the tiny tree. its delicate branches shaped by careful hands, and felt her throat tighten. It wasn't flowers, it wasn't diamonds. It was something that spoke to who she was, to what she cherished. "Thank you," she said softly, and for the first time in weeks, she let her guard drop enough to meet his gaze without turning away. That night, as Anna placed the bonsai on her windowsill, she realized that forgiveness was not about forgetting. It was about choosing, every day, whether to let the cracks remain or to let something new grow in their place. Richard was trying. That much was clear, and though her heart still ached, though she still guarded herself, she could no longer deny the truth a part of her wanted to let him in. The invitation came on a Thursday evening, tucked into the quiet between emails and phone calls. "Come with me this weekend," Richard said simply, his tone steady, but his eyes carrying something vulnerable. Anna hesitated. Where? Not far. A cabin by a lake. He paused. No boardrooms, no phones, just time. She studied him carefully. Part of her wanted to refuse, to protect herself from the risks of hope. But another part, the part that remembered his patience these last weeks, his gentleness with Emily, his quiet persistence whispered that maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself this. "All right," she said finally. The cabin sat nestled in the Colorado woods, overlooking a lake that mirrored the sky. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Birds skimmed across the water, their wings catching the afternoon light. Anna stepped out of the car and drew in a breath. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Richard watched her, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I thought you might like it." Inside, the cabin was warm and simple stone fireplace, wooden beams, shelves stacked with old novels. It was a place that felt lived in, though not by them. For once, Richard didn't seem like the commanding CEO. He set down their bags without ceremony, rolled up his sleeves, and asked, "Hungry?" Anna raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I try." The kitchen became their stage for something unfamiliar normalcy. Richard chopped vegetables with precision, while Anna stirred a pot on the stove. They bumped elbows, shared small laughs, teased each other over seasoning. When he reached for the salt, their hands brushed, and for a moment, both froze, the air thick with unspoken feeling. Dinner was simple grilled chicken, roasted potatoes, fresh salad, but it tasted richer than any five-star meal. They ate by the fire, talking not of business or strategy, but of childhood memories, favorite books, regrets. "I used to dream of being a teacher," Anna admitted, her gaze soft on the flames. "Before life redirected me." "You'd have been a good one," Richard said quietly. She looked at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "You don't even like classrooms." "Maybe not. But I know strength when I see it. And patience." "You have both." Her chest tightened. Compliments from him were rare, and this one felt unpolished, uncalculated, real. The next morning, they walked along the forest trail, the lake glittering through the trees. The ground was damp with dew, their steps crunching softly on pine needles. "Do you ever regret it?" Anna asked suddenly. "Regret what? Building everything on your own. Choosing solitude." Richard was silent for a long moment. "I used to think it was the only way. Depend on no one. Need no one. But lately?" He trailed off, glancing at her. "Lately, I wonder what it cost me." Anna held his gaze, her heart aching with both sadness and hope. "It doesn't have to cost you forever." They stopped by the water's edge, the reflection of the sky shimmering at their feet. The silence stretched, not heavy but charged, like the pause before music begins. Richard reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, steady, trembling only slightly. That evening, back at the cabin, the rain began to fall soft at first, then steady against the roof. They lit a fire, its glow flickering across the room. Anna sat curled on the couch, a blanket draped over her lap. Richard sat beside her, closer than usual, their shoulders nearly touching. For a while, they simply listened to the rain. The world outside blurred, leaving only the two of them in the circle of firelight. "Anna," Richard said softly, his voice rough, uncertain. She turned to him, her breath catching at the look in his eyes, unguarded, tender, filled with a longing he could no longer hide. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to lose you again." Her heart pounded. She had waited, tested, doubted, and now, faced with his honesty, the walls she had built began to crumble. "Then don't," she whispered. The space between them closed. His lips met hers, hesitant at first, then deep, desperate, reverent. The kiss was not about possession or transaction. It was about surrender, about two people choosing, against fear and history, to let love in. Clothes fell away, not in haste, but in reverence. Every touch was tentative, every breath shared, as though they were learning a language new to them both. Richard's hands trembled against her skin, not from uncertainty of desire, but from awe. Anna, in turn, let herself feel what she had long denied, that this was not just attraction, this was love, fragile and fierce. The storm outside raged, but within the cabin, warmth enveloped them. They came together not as employer and secretary, not as broken pasts, but as man and woman, vulnerable and whole. When it was over, they lay wrapped in the quiet, the fire burning low. Richard traced a hand along her arm, his touch uncharacteristically gentle. "Stay," he murmured. Anna smiled faintly, her head resting on his chest. "I wasn't planning to leave." For Richard Hale, the weekend became something more than an escape. It was a revelation that love, once feared as weakness, could feel like strength. That intimacy, once dismissed as distraction, could feel like truth. For Anna Whitmore, it was a step toward healing, a reminder that forgiveness was possible, and that even the hardest hearts could learn to open. Winter lingered in Denver, the air crisp with snow that refused to melt. The city lights glittered against the frosted streets. But for Richard Hale, the cold no longer mattered. His life, once ruled by steel and solitude, had begun to warm. He had brought Anna and Emily into his world slowly, deliberately, not as an arrangement, not as an obligation, but as a choice. Weekends were no longer spent in silence, but in the gentle chaos of family grocery trips, movie nights, the simple rhythm of shared meals. Richard found himself learning things he had never imagined: how Emily liked her hot chocolate, how Anna hummed while she folded laundry, how laughter filled the hollow corners of his penthouse until it felt like a home. But still, there was a weight pressing on him, a question unasked, a promise unspoken. So, one evening, he invited Anna to dinner, not in a restaurant, not in his sterile penthouse, but in the small garden he had begun to cultivate on the rooftop. Snowflakes clung to the pines he had planted in neat rows, and lanterns glowed softly along the edges of the path. At the center stood a single table, simple and elegant, with candles flickering against the night. Anna stepped out, her breath misting in the cold air. She wore a wool coat, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She looked at the setting, then at him, curiosity softening her features. "Richard, what is all this?" He took her hand, guiding her to the table. "Something I should have done long ago." Dinner was quiet, intimate. They spoke of Emily's school projects, of the cabin by the lake, of books they had both begun to read. Yet beneath the conversation, Richard's heart pounded with anticipation. He had faced investors, judges, rivals, but never this kind of fear. When dessert was finished, he rose, his breath clouding in the winter air. "Anna," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "There was a time I thought I could live my life alone. That solitude was strength. I told myself love was weakness, that I didn't need it. But you proved me wrong." She looked up, her eyes shining in the lantern light. "You gave me something I didn't think I deserved," he continued. "Your patience, your trust, your forgiveness. You brought light into places I thought would always stay dark. And you gave me Emily, a child who makes me want to be better, not just for myself, but for the family we could be." Anna's breath caught, She had never seen him so bare, so unguarded. Richard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. He knelt, the snow crunching beneath his knee, and opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring. The diamond caught the candlelight, scattering it into 1,000 sparks. "Anna Whitmore," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Will you marry me? Not as a contract, not as a condition, but as my partner, my equal, the woman I love. I want to build a life with you and with Emily, not because I need an heir, but because I cannot imagine my future without you." For a moment, Anna was silent, her hand trembling over her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. "Richard," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I never thought I would hear those words from you. They're the only words I know to be true," he said simply. Her chest tightened with a mixture of joy and fear. She loved him, of that she had no doubt. He had proven himself in ways that went beyond grand gestures. He had shown up in the ordinary, in the fragile, in the patient waiting. But part of her still feared the future. Could a man so accustomed to control truly embrace the messiness of family, of love? Yet when she looked into his eyes, she saw no calculation, no coldness, only sincerity, only devotion. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling freely. "Yes, Richard, I'll marry you." Relief washed over him, and for the first time in years, he smiled fully, a smile unburdened by pride or power. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady despite the trembling in his chest. She threw her arms around him, and he held her tightly, the snow falling softly around them, the city below glowing like a witness to their promise. For Richard Hale, it was not just a proposal, it was redemption. For Anna Whitmore, it was not just an acceptance, it was hope. And though both carried scars, they knew this truth. Love was not about perfection. It was about choosing each other again and again, even when the future remained uncertain. Spring came late to Colorado that year, but when it finally arrived, it bloomed with a kind of stubborn beauty. Snowmelt trickled down the Rockies, feeding streams that glistened in the sunlight. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of wildflowers. On a Saturday afternoon, in a small garden nestled at the edge of Boulder, Richard Hale and Anna Whitmore promised each other forever. It wasn't a grand affair. Richard had the means to host a wedding in the grandest of hotels, to hire orchestras and cover every surface in roses. But that wasn't what Anna wanted. And for once, Richard had listened. She wanted simplicity, warmth, a celebration not of wealth, but of love. So they chose the garden of a friend's estate, its archways twined with blooming lilacs and tulips. Folding chairs lined the aisle, draped in white ribbons. A small string quartet played softly in the corner, their notes carried by the breeze. Anna stood at the entrance, her heart fluttering. She wore a gown of ivory lace, elegant but not ostentatious. Her blonde hair fell in loose curls, a crown of fresh wildflowers resting lightly on her head. Emily held her hand, dressed in pale blue, her face glowing with excitement. "Ready, Mom?" Emily whispered, squeezing her fingers. Anna nodded, her eyes misting. More than ever. The guests rose as she walked down the aisle. Friends, colleagues, a handful of family members, all gathered not for spectacle, but for love. She saw Claire in the front row, beaming with tears in her eyes. She saw Emily's teacher, her neighbors, people who had been part of their everyday lives. And at the end of the aisle stood Richard. He wore a simple black suit, no flash, no unnecessary adornment, but it was his expression that stole her breath. For once, his face was unguarded, his eyes soft, his lips curved in a genuine smile that reached all the way to his soul. When Anna reached him, Richard took her hand with reverence, his thumb brushing over her skin as if to remind himself she was real. The officiant spoke with warmth, words about love, partnership, and the courage it takes to trust again. But for Anna, the words blurred. All she could focus on was Richard's gaze, steady and unwavering, promising silently what his voice would soon declare. When it came time for vows, Richard surprised everyone. He had written his own. "Anna," he began, his deep voice trembling slightly. "I spent years believing I was stronger alone, that love was weakness, that solitude was safety. But then you came into my life, and you proved me wrong. You showed me that true strength is opening your heart, even when it terrifies you. I vow to never take your trust for granted again. I vow to love not in contracts or conditions, but in patience, in honesty, in every ordinary day we share." Anna's tears spilled freely, and when it was her turn, she took a breath, her voice shaking but sure. "Richard, I never expected to find love again. I had built a life around Emily and me, and I thought that was enough. But then you, with all your guarded ways and quiet fears, you taught me that love can bloom even in the most unexpected places. I vow to stand with you, not only in joy, but in struggle, not only in strength, but in vulnerability. I vow to choose you every day." Emily sniffled loudly in the front row, making the guests laugh gently, the tension breaking into warmth. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Richard didn't hesitate. He kissed Anna with tenderness and conviction, the garden erupting in applause. The reception that followed was as simple as the ceremony tables set under white canopies, decorated with jars of fresh flowers. The food was hearty and comforting. Roasted chicken, grilled vegetables, fresh bread, apple pie. Nothing extravagant, but everything delicious. Children ran across the lawn, playing tag among the tulips. Adults lingered over glasses of wine, laughter rising into the spring air. Richard and Anna shared their first dance beneath the glow of string lights, the quartet playing softly. He held her close, his steps careful, his hand firm at her back. "You're nervous," she teased gently. "I don't dance," he muttered. "You do now," she whispered, smiling against his shoulder. Later, he danced with Emily. She stood on his shoes, giggling as he guided her clumsily across the grass. For Anna, watching them together was a gift. She hadn't dared to dream of a glimpse of the family she once thought impossible. Claire raised a toast, her voice breaking with emotion. To Anna and Richard, proof that love isn't about perfection, but persistence. May you always find each other, even in the hardest moments. The guests cheered, glasses clinking, the sound carrying into the twilight. As the night drew to a close, Richard and Anna slipped away from the crowd, standing at the edge of the garden where the stars reflected in the still pond. "Do you ever think we'd be here?" Anna asked softly, her hand in his. Richard shook his head, his thumb brushing the ring on her finger. "Not in 1,000 years. But I wouldn't trade this moment for all the years I thought I understood myself." Anna leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart swelling. She was still afraid of the unknown, of the struggles ahead. But for the first time, her fears were not heavier than her hope. And as the music drifted from the reception behind them, she realized this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning. Marriage did not transform Richard Hale overnight. He was still the man who rose at dawn, who checked his emails before breakfast, who carried the weight of his company on his shoulders. But something had shifted, something small, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. There was laughter in his home now. There was warmth where once there had only been silence. At first, Richard fumbled. Emily was bright, inquisitive, and endlessly curious, qualities that both charmed and intimidated him. He had no experience with children, no roadmap for how to step into her world. One Saturday morning, he attempted pancakes. He measured flour as though it were a financial report, double-checking every line of the recipe. When Emily peeked over his shoulder, she giggled. "You're supposed to whisk it, not fold it like origami," she said. Richard arched a brow. "Origami paper folding," she explained patiently, like a tiny professor. Despite his efforts, the pancakes came out lopsided, too thick in the middle, too thin at the edges. Emily poked one with her fork and declared, "Well, they taste better than they look." Anna laughed from the doorway, watching them. Richard's cheeks flushed, but when Emily grinned at him, He realized he didn't mind failing, not here, not with her. There were other moments too. Helping Emily with a science project, he found himself explaining the principles of balance as she built a model bridge. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration, and when the bridge stood without toppling, she beamed. "See, Mom," she called proudly. "Richard says it's all about structure." Anna smiled. "I think it's also about patience." Richard glanced at her, and she held his gaze, both of them, knowing how far he had come in learning that lesson. Evenings became their most treasured time. Anna would cook, Emily would chatter about her day, and Richard, once a silent figure at dinner tables, began to join in. He learned how to ask questions, how to listen not with the intent to respond, but simply to understand. It was awkward at first, but gradually, the awkwardness melted into rhythm, into family. Then came the day Anna realized something had changed. She had been feeling unusually tired, her body heavier than usual. At first, she dismissed it long work hours, the stress of adjusting to marriage. But when she missed her second cycle, a quiet suspicion began to stir. A doctor's visit confirmed it: she was pregnant. Anna sat in the small exam room, her hands pressed to her stomach, tears pricking her eyes, not out of fear, not even out of surprise, but out of something deeper: gratitude. This was no contract, no arrangement, no negotiation. This was life, born of love. That evening, she told Richard, he was in the living room, reviewing papers, when she came to sit beside him. Her hand found his, trembling slightly. "Richard," she said softly, "we're going to have a baby." For a moment, he froze. His eyes widened, his breath caught. Then slowly, the papers slid from his hands. Forgotten. "A baby," he repeated, as though tasting the word for the first time. Anna nodded, her eyes misting. Yes, something broke open in him, something he hadn't even realized was locked away. His arms came around her, holding her with a reverence that words could not match. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "It's not a gift, Richard. It's us. It's love." He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the truth of it. For so long, he had thought legacy was all he needed. Now, he understood legacy meant nothing without love to give it meaning. Emily was delighted when she found out. "Does this mean I'll be a big sister?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Yes," Anna said, pulling her close. "And you're going to be the best one." Emily turned to Richard, her eyes wide. "Are you excited?" Richard, who had once feared the very idea of family, surprised himself by smiling. "More than I can say." Emily beamed and threw her arms around him, and he hugged her back, his heart swelling with a love he never thought himself capable of. Nights grew tenderer after that. Richard would rest his hand against Anna's belly, still flat but carrying a promise, and marvel at the miracle of it. He found himself daydreaming not of boardrooms or profits, but of holding a child, of seeing Anna's smile reflected in tiny eyes, of Emily cradling her sibling with pride. For a man who had once lived behind walls, it was a startling, humbling transformation. Marriage had not erased their scars. They still argued over schedules, over boundaries, over his tendency to bring work home. Anna still feared, in quiet moments, that old habits might return. Richard still wrestled with his instinct to control, but now they argued as partners. They wrestled as a family, and beneath every disagreement was a thread unbreakable love. In the end, that was what defined their new beginning: not perfection, but persistence; not grandeur, but intimacy; not legacy alone, but the family that gave it meaning. And as spring deepened into summer, as Anna's body began to change, Richard Hale found himself standing at the edge of something he had never dared imagine: a life not of solitude, but of love. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, the kind of place where time stretched and folded in strange ways. For Richard Hale, minutes felt like hours, and hours like eternities. Anna had gone into labor in the early morning, contractions waking her before dawn. At first, she tried to breathe through them at home, leaning against the kitchen counter as Richard hovered, pale and anxious, offering water, offering his arm, offering anything that might help. By the time they reached the hospital, the contractions had intensified. Nurses whisked her into a room, bustling with calm efficiency, while Richard followed like a shadow, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. He was a man who conquered crises' daily hostile negotiations, financial gambles, courtroom threats, but nothing had ever undone him like this. Watching Anna writhe in pain, watching monitors beep and doctors murmur, he felt powerless in a way he had never known. "Mr. Hale," a nurse said gently, "you should sit down. It could be a long process." "I'm not leaving her," he said firmly. Anna looked at him, sweat beading on her forehead, eyes wide with both fear and strength. "Then don't," she whispered, gripping his hand. He sat beside her, and for hours, he stayed. He held her hand through every wave of pain, whispered encouragement when her breath grew ragged, pressed cool cloths to her forehead. Emily, safe at home with Claire, had begged him to call the moment the baby was born. He promised he would. Time blurred, daylight turned to dusk, and still, the labor dragged on. Richard's back ached, his throat was dry, but he refused to leave her side. Every cry tore at him. Every squeeze of her hand made him realize just how much she endured to bring their child into the world. And then finally, the room shifted. Nurses moved with new urgency. The doctor announced it was time, and Richard felt his heart slam against his ribs. "Push! Anna!" the doctor said firmly. Richard leaned close, his forehead nearly touching hers. "You can do this," he murmured, his voice raw. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." "Just a little more," she cried out, pushing with every ounce of strength she had left. Richard's hand nearly went numb in her grip, but he didn't flinch. He would have given anything, his fortune, his power, his very life, to take her pain away. And then it happened. A cry filled the room, small, fierce, alive. Richard froze. The sound pierced straight through him, shattering every wall he had ever built. He turned, his vision blurring, as the nurse lifted a tiny, wriggling baby into the world. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, smiling. Anna collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "Richard," she whispered. The nurse placed the baby into her arms, and Richard leaned over, staring in awe. The child was perfect tiny fists, a wrinkled face, lungs strong as he wailed against the newness of life. Richard's throat closed. He had imagined this moment before, coldly, clinically, as legacy, as continuity. But the reality was nothing like his imagination. This was not about bloodlines or names. This was love, pure, unfiltered, overwhelming. He reached out, his hands trembling, and Anna guided the baby into his arms. For the first time in his life, Richard Hale held his son. The weight of him was light, barely more than a bundle of blankets, and yet it was the heaviest thing Richard had ever carried. His chest shook, his vision blurred, and before he could stop himself, tears slid down his face. He's perfect," Richard whispered hoarsely. Anna reached for his hand, her own face radiant despite exhaustion. "He's ours." Richard looked at her, then at the baby, and something inside him broke open completely. All the years of solitude, all the fear of love, all the arrogance of control, they crumbled in the face of this tiny, crying miracle. He bent his head, pressing his lips to the baby's forehead, his tears dampening the soft skin. "I love you," he whispered, the words spilling out without hesitation. "I love you more than I thought I could ever love anything." Anna smiled through her own tears. "Now you know, Richard, this is what family is." He nodded, unable to speak, his arms cradling both the child and the truth. Hours later, when the room had quieted and Anna drifted into sleep, Richard sat in the chair beside her bed, the baby nestled against his chest. The monitors beeped softly, the The night shift nurses moved quietly, but all Richard heard was the steady, rhythmic breathing of his son. He thought of Emily, waiting eagerly to meet her brother. He thought of Anna, her strength, her courage, the love that had carried them here. And he thought of himself, not the CEO, not the empire builder, but a man reborn in the arms of his child. For the first time, Richard understood that family was not weakness. It was the greatest strength he had ever known. The years slipped by with the quiet rhythm of seasons. The cabin by the lake had become a sanctuary for the Hale family, a place away from the city, away from boardrooms and deadlines. Here, the days unfolded slowly, mornings filled with birdsong, afternoons shaped by laughter, and evenings wrapped in the gentle hush of twilight. On one such evening, Richard sat on the wide wooden porch, a glass of iced tea resting on the arm of his chair. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth. The lake shimmered in the fading light, reflecting the last hues of a sun that sank lazily behind the trees. Anna sat beside him, her hair streaked now with threads of silver, her smile still as steady as the day he had first seen her walk into his office. Emily, nearly grown, leaned against the porch railing with a book in her hand, her laughter mingling with the shouts of her younger brother as he chased fireflies across the grass. Richard watched them, his chest swelling with a gratitude that words could never hold. He thought back to the man he used to be, the man who dined alone in penthouses, who built walls higher than skyscrapers, who believed that love was weakness. That man had sat in silence, convincing himself he needed nothing beyond legacy, beyond control. But life had proven him wrong. He turned to Anna, catching her gaze in the fading light. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked softly. She smiled, her eyes reflecting both joy and memory. "All the time." Emily glanced over, her smile teasing. "Are you two going to get sentimental again?" Anna laughed, shaking her head. Richard only chuckled, though his eyes glistened with the weight of truth. "Maybe," he admitted, "maybe we have the right to be, later." After the children had gone inside, Richard remained on the porch, the quiet settling around him. Anna rested her hand over his, her fingers still fitting perfectly after all these years. "I used to think strength was being alone," he said, his voice low, reflective, that needing someone made me weak. "But now I know real strength is choosing someone, even when it scares you, especially when it scares you." Anna's thumb brushed against his hand, a simple affirmation. "Our love was never about perfection," she said. "It was about persistence, about choosing again, even when it was hard." Richard nodded. He thought of that rainy night in Denver, of the foolish words that had nearly cost him everything. He thought of Anna's courage, her refusal to be reduced to a transaction, and how her strength had forced him to confront his own fears. Love had not been easy. It had not been clean, but it had been worth everything. As the stars began to pierce the sky, Richard leaned back, letting the cool night air wash over him. He felt complete not because of wealth, not because of legacy, but because of the laughter inside that cabin, because of the woman beside him, because of the children who carried both his heart and hers. Turning once more to Anna, he whispered, "Thank you for choosing me when I didn't deserve it." Her smile was soft, knowing. "And thank you for learning to choose me back." They sat in silence for a while, watching fireflies flicker across the yard. The world was quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but full of memory, full of love, full of the unspoken truth that their journey had been more than survival. It had been transformation. For Richard Hale, the story had begun in solitude and fear. For Anna Whitmore, it had begun in resilience and hope. Together, they had stumbled, failed, forgiven, and grown. Their love was not a contract. It was not a transaction. It was a choice made again and again, through fear and doubt, through joy and pain. And that was the truth Richard wanted to leave with anyone who cared to listen. Love is not the absence of fear. It is the courage to walk through fear, hand in hand. As the night deepened and the family gathered inside, Richard cast one last glance at the lake. The water shimmered under the starlight, steady and eternal. He rose, taking Anna's hand as they stepped inside together. And in that moment, he knew with a certainty beyond contracts, beyond control, that love had saved him. Love, and the woman who had refused to let him buy what could only be given freely. As we look back on Richard and Anna's journey, one truth stands clear. Love is never a contract, a bargain, or a transaction. It is a choice, sometimes a terrifying one, that requires patience, forgiveness, and above all, courage. Richard began as a man who thought control and solitude were signs of strength. Yet it was only when he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to risk rejection, that he discovered the deeper strength of family and devotion. Anna, on the other hand, taught us that dignity must never be traded, even for wealth. She stood firm, even in heartbreak, and by doing so, she invited love that was real, not purchased. For those of us in the later chapters of life, their story is a reminder it is never too late to open our hearts, to heal from past wounds, and to choose companionship again. True love is not about perfection or guarantees. It is about showing up every day with trust and commitment despite the uncertainty. And perhaps the most powerful lesson of all is this family is not built through fear or control, but through love freely given, again and again. Thank you, dear friends, for joining me on this heartfelt journey of love, redemption, and second chances. If Richard and Anna's story touched your heart, I invite you to keep the spirit of love alive with us. Please give this video a like, share it with someone who believes in the power of love, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. Together, we can continue to celebrate hope, courage, and the beautiful truth that love can transform even the hardest of hearts.